Welcome to Worldwide Wisdom, folks. What would you prefer? Would you prefer life when it's tough or life when it's awesome? You prefer life when it's tough?
No, life when it's awesome.
I mean, obviously, Rabbi, we prefer life when it's awesome. Who wants life when it's tough? Right? It's almost like the people that, hey, Marty, good morning. It's almost like the people that get the raw end. It's called the short stick, the short end of the stick. It's like they're the losers of existence, right? You know, you get the 1%. This is what one might think. I'm not saying this. It's called in Talmudic parlance, a hava amina, a I would have thought. That, you know, you get the 1% that are the lucky ones, and then there's the 90% of the losers, right? Right? If you happen to be born in out of the royal gilded tax bracket, right, of life, or the health bracket of life, or the relationship bracket of emotional intimacy, then you just started treading water, right? But there's got to be more to life than success. When we go back to the great training ground of life, there was a 40-year immersive college experience that God put us through for 40 years as he prepared us for real life. I'm talking about the 40 years that the Jews traversed through the desert from slavery to freedom, from Egyptian bondage to self-governance in the promised land. During those 40 years, this wasn't merely a journey. We're on page 1109, by the way, in the Chumash. This wasn't merely a journey that happened to take 40 years because they had a broken GPS. I mean, it really doesn't take 40 years to go from Egypt to Israel. I mean, just jump, hop, skip, and a jump over the Suez Canal, and you're done. There wasn't even a Suez Canal to cross in those days because they didn't blast through the desert yet. They could just walk across. I mean, what, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month if you're taking the time? 40 years. What took them 40 years? It's not that the Jews it's not that the journey took 40 years as much as that 40 years were needed. It's not that they needed 40 years to arrive at the promised land. It's that they needed 40 years to experience freedom, to be able to experience the lessons that were to last them for 3,338 years until 2025 today. To empower us with the tools to confidently, courageously, and maturely face the challenges that we encounter today, to help us realize that both poverty and affluence, both health and suffering, both joy and heartbreak are all part of our divine purpose in this world. The lesson that they were learning is that whatever you are experiencing is essentially a test from God. Some of us are given one kind of a test, others are given a different kind of a test, depending on your soul, depending on your temperament, depending on your trajectory, depending on your specific purpose in this world. We are all given and assigned different kinds of missions, much like soldiers that are fighting a battle. Not everybody has to be in intelligence. Some people are infantry, others are in tanks, others are in parachutes. Not everybody has to jump out of an airplane, right? Some people are crawling through the weeds, others are in bunkers, others are in the ground, others are in ships, the Navy, right? You wouldn't tell a Navy guy to jump out of an airplane. I mean, maybe you would, but it's a different specialty. In exactly the same way, God gives us challenges for us to overcome. Specifically, those challenges fall into two general categories of wealth and poverty. Which means not only when you have poverty are you being tested by God, but even when you have wealth, you're being tested by God. What's the test of poverty? Will you lose your faith? Will you lose your morals? Will you do anything? Will you sell your soul for success? Right? Will you, if you're poor, will you violate the Shabbos? Will you violate your marriage? Will you violate your principles in order to make a few bucks? Right? I mean, that's a very understandable test, very relatable. But then there's the test of wealth as well. The test of wealth is, are you going to become a narcissist? Are you going to become an ivory tower who credits himself alone with his success without being able to be sensitized to the needs of other people? There's a beautiful story of a rabbi who was collecting for the needs of the poor. And he knocks at the door of a wealthy man, and it's during a blizzard, a snowstorm, and the wealthy man sees the rabbi standing outside in the blizzard. He says, "Rabbi, come in quickly." He says, No. I have to talk to you outside. Are you sure, Rabbi? Yeah. I'm absolutely sure. Please step outside. It's a blizzard. I need to talk to you outside. Okay, Rabbi, whatever you say. And the guy steps outside. He brings a coat. He's freezing. He's not used to standing in a blizzard, in sleet and snow and rain. And there they're having a conversation. And the man says, "Rabbi, what can I do for you?" And he says, "I'm here to collect money for the poor." "Rabbi, can we take this conversation inside?" No. We have to talk outside. "Why, Rabbi? I can't think straight over here." So he says, "Because inside it's too warm and cozy. You won't feel the pain of the people that are homeless. I have to have this conversation with you outside so that you'll be able to identify with the people that have to deal with this because they don't have a roof over their head." How easy it is for us to become complacent and desensitized to the pain of the people that have less than us. One of our viewers here, I was so touched to receive an email from Duncan from Kenya. He sent me an email about how he wants to join our trust and faith community movement. And he sends me a picture of how he lives. He's standing in front of a corrugated metal shack in Kenya. And we're starting a conversation. We're learning together. And it's very, very beautiful for me to realize that, that I'm able to have a conversation with a guy like Duncan. I told him, of course, I'm West African, right? I'm from South Africa. He's from Central Africa. I'm from Southern Africa. And we're able to communicate, to connect. It's very, very meaningful to be able to engage, and how fortunate we are to have this medium of YouTube to be able to connect all over the world in this worldwide wisdom, this global classroom. But how easy it is, we live in Palm Beach. It's easy to take for granted that you have street lights, and that you have paved roads, and that you have gutters, and that you have sewage, which is dealt with safely. But if you're living in Kenya, I mean, I'm not sure that he has electricity in that house. And if tarred roads, forget about it. Running water, not so simple, right? Right. But I was thinking, I was asking him, how do you have internet? He probably goes to the local library or something. Very interesting. In Africa, it's not so simple. So let's analyze how we were trained in the great college of life, in the 40 years in the desert, how we were trained to be able to experience, to give us the tools that we need to be able to face the challenges that we are undoubtedly going to encounter, whether they are challenges of success or of struggle, whether they're challenges of health or of illness, whether they're challenges, because again, with health, you can say, "I don't need God. I'm a healthy person. I'm pumping iron, I'm doing the elliptical, I'm running the marathon. I don't need God. I got my doctor. I'm good," right? It's easy to become desensitized, to become apathetic to God, and until a crisis happens. And then, of course, in relationships as well, it's easy to think that life is good when you're in a loving relationship, until you're not, right? When you're in a loving relationship, it's easy to sell your soul, to forget your morals for the one that you love. When in essence, there's your identity, which you have to remember and you have to nurture without losing yourself to Getting lost in the love. Anyways, let's take a look at this beautiful concept that comes up in our Torah portion this week. It's on page 1109. It would be in Parshas Eikev. We're in the second reading of Parshas Eikev. It would be Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse. Let's start verse 11 at the beginning of the second Aliyah. So after God has rewarded you with the material abundance and military victory, beware lest you forget God your God by not keeping his commandments, ordinances, and rules, which I'm commanding you today, guys. It's amazing to look at Jewish history. Jewish history is a yo-yo effect. It's amazing. I encourage you to read the books of the prophets. You know, there's the Tanakh. The Tanakh stands for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, which means the 5 books of Moses, Torah. Nevi'im is the prophets, and the Ketuvim is the writing. Just read through the prophets. In the books of the prophets, it's like, this is the storyline. The Jewish people are righteous and holy and observant, and life is great. But then they become too secure. They descend into complacency, which descends quickly into into apathy, into indifference, and desensitization from God. And they slip away from divine observance. Comes a prophet and he'll warn them, I'm warning you guys, if you stray from God, things are not going to go well. God's going to send you a wake-up call, and they ignore him until some calamity happens, and then they cry out to God and to teshuva, repentance. They rise all the way to the top, and God says, okay, lesson learned. I can get rid of the tormentor, and life is good for another few years until they descend into this complacency and apathy and indifference and sinfulness. And then the prophet comes in and they ignore the prophet. And again, a calamity, a crisis, an exile, persecution, a war on October 7th, something. And they cry out to God in repentance. And it's just this yo-yo effect. It's amazing, right? So God is telling us right here at the very beginning, I'm warning you that don't let the military victories, don't let your successes get to your head. Beware lest you eat and be sated, and build sturdy houses and dwell in them, and your herds and your flock multiply, and your silver and gold increase, and all that you have increase, and life is amazing. And you say, well, I'm a genius, and I don't need God. And your heart subsequently grows haughty, and you forget God, your God, who took you out of Egypt and out of the house of slaves. And you get to your head, right?
The first impression when I read Torah first time, many years ago, it was like a lesson. Hey, it's all the time Jews become complacent, get punished.
So you got this lesson the first time you read Torah. How old were you when you first time you read Torah?
I don't know, maybe 30.
You were 30. You were living in the Soviet Union under Brezhnev.
No, I was already here.
Oh, you were already in America at 30. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I came when I was 27.
Right.
But that was the first impression.
Good. Okay, fine. So that's what it says. This week's Torah, maybe it was this week's Torah portion. Who led you through the great and awesome desert, which was notorious for its snakes, vipers, scorpions, and thirst, induced from lack of water, who brought forth water from you out of flintstone. So basically, God is saying, look, I want to make sure you guys don't forget. I want to make sure you don't forget. Now, is Judaism capitalist or communist, by the way? Capitalist or communist? A capitalist or socialist? Which one is Judaism? Capitalist, okay, says the Russian. Okay. How about socialist? Anybody push for socialism? Bernie Sanders style? No? No? He's not socialist?
No.
Not? Okay. So forgive me for that. So Judaism is neither capitalist nor socialist. It's got elements of both. On the one hand, it's free market, free trade. You're not supposed to apologize for being rich, right? You don't have to apologize for being successful. But at the same time, you cannot forget the poor. Corners of your field, you have to leave to the poor. The gleanings of your field, the forgotten sheaves, you got to leave that for the poor. Tithing of your earnings, you got to give to the priests, you got to give to the Levites, you got to give to the poor. There's all sorts of reminders reminding us that we're actually in partnership with God. Every time you give charity, you are effectively declaring that God is my partner and I need to pay his share. How fortunate we are that our partner is only asking for 10%, up to 20%, no more, and not 50%. You know, if God was asking you for 75% of your successes, would you give it to him?
Maybe the U.S. tax collector.
Is that what it's at? 75%?
Or certain income brackets.
75%?
Yeah.
Seriously? Wow. But seriously, think about that. Think about that for a second. If God asked you for 70% of your earnings.
What's the point of work?
Yeah, but look, if he gave you $12 million and he asked you to give him 75%, I mean, it sounds like a good deal. You know, Columbia University had to pay $200 million in fines for their anti-Semitic protests, right? But if you do the math, I mean, they paid $200 million in fines in order to unfreeze $500 million in federal funding. I mean, I'm not sure I understand the slap on the wrist here. I'm not sure I completely get it. But but you get the picture here where, you know, if God is only asking you for 20% max of your earnings, 10% minimum of your earnings, I mean, that's a good deal, but it's a reminder that amidst your dizzying heights of success, you could be a Fortune 500 billionaire, but don't ever forget the poor. So it's compassionate capitalism. Compassionate capitalism. But here comes the kicker in verse 16. Remember, it is God who fed you in the desert with manna, which your forefathers did not know, in order to afflict you, in order to test you for your ultimate benefit. Isn't that an interesting expression? The menu, the buffet in the desert for 40 years was the manna. What was the manna? It was bread that came out of heaven miraculously, appearing every morning, that gave them the food that they needed, the nutrients that they needed in order to survive. So this was to afflict you in order to test you, right? My understanding of this is that it was there not only to afflict them, but for us to reflect on every day of the subsequent 3,000 plus years, so that we can remember what is the nature of our human experience through the lens of the manna and its affliction and its testing. And you say to yourself, it is my own strength and the might of my own hand that have accumulated this wealth for me. And since I created myself, I do not owe God anything for it. Rather, you should remember God your God, for it is he who gives you strength to become wealthy. For it is he who gives you strength to become wealthy in order to fulfill his covenant that he swore to your forefathers' name need to give their descendants this land, as he is doing today. Remember, God is giving the descendants of the Israelites this land, right? Remember what that means? When God gives us the land of Israel, it is the promised land. This is the only country in the world that has the unique appellation of being the promised land. America is not the promised land. Europe is not the promised land. All of these countries were conquered by the victors who rewrote the history and who drove out the people that were living there prior. Only the land of Israel was promised by the maker of the universe to the Jewish people. And when people at the United Nations or other governments try to deny the Jewish people their connection to the land of Israel, what they're essentially doing is declaring their rage against the appellation promised land, against the chosen people, against the Bible. It is essentially a war against God. Because if someone was to believe in God, in the maker of the universe, and believing in the Bible, then it's plain and clear all over the Bible that the land of Israel was given by God to the Jewish people. And who on earth are you at the United Nations, or the government of France, or the government of Spain, or Portugal, or wherever else, or Australia, that you've now decided that the Jewish people have no right to the land of Israel? This is essentially a war against God. But let's analyze this a little bit more. So our sages tell us that the Torah tells us that the manna was there to afflict us. Why was it there to afflict us? Because on the one hand, it didn't have, you weren't able to see the food that you were eating. Imagine somebody offered you a buffet of all sorts of delicious food, or a pill which had all the nutrients that you need. Which one would you prefer?
I like eating, so I'm going for the buffet. Yeah.
But if you just had a pill, like I imagine that, you know, in on the NASA space missions, I imagine that they don't have like buffets, right? They don't have like a kitchen staff. They just give them like, you know, like little pills or something which have all the nutrients that they need. I imagine this. I never checked that. But I imagine that they don't have like a full-on catering department in the, you know.
That's like the kids eat the gel packs and stuff.
Yeah, so they're eating. It's difficult to see the food that you're eating, so you're not actually having the satisfaction of the food. I mean, there's a whole art to the presentation of the food, right? So on the one hand, the Jewish people, having eaten the manna, which was in the form of a coriander seed, it's like what is that? It's like it's like cilantro. It's like little cilantro seeds. It's like sesame seeds. I mean, okay, fine. So it's got all the nutrients I need, but it's not exactly filling to the eyes, right? It says that. I mean,
cream of wheat seeds. It's called manna in Russian.
Oh, really? Cream of wheat is called manna in Russian?
Yeah.
Wow, that's very interesting, right? In addition, you know what the manna tasted like? It tastes like anything you wanted it to. You know that?
Yeah.
However, because
It tasted like anything you wanted.
it tasted like anything you wanted it to, because you couldn't see
It
it.
had.
No, because the Talmud says that you cannot compare the joy, the pleasure of someone who sees the food that he eats versus someone who doesn't see the food that he eats. That's the reason. It's considered a great disservice to your taste buds when you cannot actually see the food that you're eating, right?
It's one of our five senses.
What? Because we're eating coriander seed and it tastes like roast beef, but or you don't see it, so you just see the coriander. It might taste like it, but because you can't see it, that's why it's.
Also visual.
Yeah, but how come you can't see
You could see the manna, but it didn't look like the food that it was tasting. If you wanted it,
okay,
if you wanted it to taste like a banana split, it didn't look like a banana split. You know what I mean? It looked like coriander seed. Number one. Now, so therefore, what happened here is that the manna had a conflict within it. There was, on the one hand, there was like a poverty in it because you couldn't get that satisfaction. There was another element to its poverty that you had to finish it on the same day. You could not leave anything over to the next day. So you had to go to sleep at night with your cupboards bare. You had to go to sleep. Imagine you sleep every night with your bank account at 0.00. Imagine. With the trust in God that tomorrow when you wake up, it's going to be replenished. I mean, that takes a tremendous amount of courage, a tremendous amount of faith. Not that they had too much choice in the matter, but there was an element of poverty to this where they had no savings. They had no security blanket. They had no, what's called a cushion, right, to be able to rely on. At the same time, they had all of their needs taken care of. So all of their nutrition needs were taken care of. And in that regard, it was considered that it was some sort of, it was an affliction, right?
Certainly against human nature.
Yeah, it's against human nature because it forces you to rely on a higher power.
Stuff.
Right, you want to accumulate stuff, right?
Wasn't the affliction? I mean, I like cake, but if I had to eat cake every single day, it would tire. I thought that was the affliction. It was that. It tasted like
whatever they wanted. It tasted like whatever they wanted.
No, it tasted like flour and honey.
That was the default flavor. The default flavor was flour and honey. But if you wanted to say, I want a flavor from the 1963 State Dinner of the White House, you get there. Right? The question is, how creative could they be, right? So now the ants, the reason that God did this for us is because God wanted to reorient us from a human-based paradigm to a God-based paradigm. To realize that we have to throw our trust into the hands of God Almighty. To realize that our entire experience is presented to us by God. And if you're able to do that, if you're able to throw your trust upon God, Hashlech al Hashem Yehavcha, it says in Psalm 55 towards the end, then what happens is that you're able to divest. You're casting away your anxieties and you're divesting of your worries to be able to throw yourself into the hands of God who carries you, right? You're carrying yourself to, you're allowing God to carry you. And that is the reorientation that was happening here through the manna, where God was saying to them, listen, you're preparing for the school of life, for real life, 3,000 plus years of life, where you're going to have all sorts of struggles. You're going to have political opponents. You're going to have wars. You're going to have economical crises. You're going to have weather issues. I hear there's a hurricane heading our way. Is it our way?
Yeah, it's going after the ocean.
Right.
It's going to be
So as you prepare for this stuff, remember that it all comes from Hashem, and everything is essentially a test. As you look at those words, it's in order to afflict you, in order to test you for your ultimate benefit. The reason why it's afflicting you with a test of poverty and the test of wealth is in order to test you, to remind you that life is a test, in order to give you ultimate benefit. If you're able to step into life with this mindset, then as the next verse continues, don't say that it's my own strength that provided me my success. No, say that it is God, your God, who gives you strength to become wealthy in order to fulfill his covenant that he swore to your forefathers, right, today. Then what you realize is that everything that happens to me is a gift from God. Whether it's good, whether it's bad, or whether it's ugly, everything comes from the hand of Hashem. And therefore, the immediate reaction is that I have nothing to be afraid of. Whether it's a test of wealth, or it's a test of poverty. Everything is essentially a test, and even the suffering that comes my way is there to send me a message from God. So whether you're experiencing wealth or whether you're experiencing poverty, we're able to recognize that it's all a lesson from God, and the best way to handle the issues that come our way, the realities of our life, is to choose the mindset of moving away from the strength of my own hand and the strength of might of my own hand have accumulated this wealth for me, and rather to make the choice to say that it is God Almighty who makes me wealthy. Because as soon as I move away from self-reliance and I move to a place of relying on God, recognizing that God is the source of all goodness, it's then that I'm able to recognize the goodness of God in every encounter that comes my way. And this, my friends, is the lesson that we're learning from the manna. Some people have the custom of reciting the manna portion every single day. They read this portion of the manna, not this one, the one from B'Shalach, from the book of Exodus. They read it every single day because what they're trying to do is to inculcate into their own consciousness an awareness that I'm always in the hands of God. If you think about how much stress you spend on how much anxiety you spend on money, think about it. And if you were able to just look at your money as bread coming out of heaven. Yes, it comes through investments, or it comes through clients, or through your business, fine. But really, it's ultimately coming from God. And if you can choose to look at your life that way, then you realize that God takes care of us every single day. God always lands the airplane. Think about that. The Jewish people, every single person received the exact amount that they needed. Every single person in the desert received exactly the same amount that they needed. And no matter how hard you tried, you can get more or less than what God decreed for you. Right? And the catch was that God was testing us also to make sure that we didn't leave anything over for the next day. Because if you left over for the next day, it would spoil, and it was an act of betrayal to God. If you left over to the next day, it meant that you didn't really trust God the next day. And that was the lesson. The lesson was to go to sleep every single night with complete trust. Chassidus explained to us, and we've learned this in the gate of trust, that when we trust in God, that's what draws the blessing upon us. And this is really what God was teaching us in the desert. I want you to learn to trust me.
Nobody went to sleep hungry.
Well, Mike, I think they did go to sleep hungry. I think they did go to sleep hungry because knowing that you have, look, the Talmud says that you can't compare a person who has bread in his basket to a person who doesn't have bread in his basket. Which means if I've got money in the bank versus not having money in the bank, it's a completely different person.
Okay.
So I think that there was different levels of people. Some people went to sleep completely satisfied, fully reliant on God. The others went to sleep completely unsatisfied, fully anxious about tomorrow. And I believe that would have been the difference between the righteous and the wicked amongst them.
Even though they each had the same.
Yeah. But the question is, could you
Somewhat,
count on it?
right.
I mean, look, I'm dealing with a guy right now who's emailing me. He's very upset with some of my videos. Very upset with some of my videos. And he says, Rabbi, you're attributing, the guy was born in Kazakhstan. He's a doctor. And he's 83 years old. And he tells me that he's some sort of an atheist. Well, he's not really an atheist. He says he believes in nature as a god, like pantheism, some sort of form of that. But he tells me that my positions are ludicrous because they're too sophisticated.
Whoa.
It's a bit of a conflict. Sometimes it says they're too sophisticated. Other times it says they're self-serving. Like if I talk about the chosen people, he says they're narcissistic. He's a Jewish doctor, right?
Oh, he's Jewish.
He's Jewish, yeah. So, but then I responded. I'm engaging with him in conversation. I said to him, listen, you were born in Kazakhstan, a son of Holocaust refugees. You moved to Canada. And in one generation, you became a very successful doctor. I mean, if that's not a miracle that you survived, then what is? Right? Then what is? you can have two survivors of the Holocaust. One becomes a huge believer and one becomes a huge atheist, right? It's how we process trauma that makes all the difference, right? We've had all the same experience. We've all had the same experience as Jewish people, but we react in vastly different ways. I mean, think about, people often say about children growing up in the same household, siblings, they say we had the same parents. We grew up in the same house, and that's not actually true, because no two siblings grew up in the same house. No two siblings grew up in the same house. The parents are different parents. Parents of the first child, very different to the parents of the middle child, very different to the parents of the youngest child. The economical situation of the parents was different in the various stages of the children. The temperament of the child was different. So in other words, both children could have experienced the same exact reality. One reacts with trauma, the other reacts with strength and assertiveness. How do you explain this? This is the Jewish people reacting to the Holocaust, to October 7th, to different crises and trials and tribulations that we've been through. Some react with faith and some react with fear. And there's nothing you can do about it. This is the lesson that we're being taught through the manna. We're put through the ringer here, through the collective experience of the manna raining upon us. And the big question God is asking us, no, so you're going to sleep tonight? Right? And it's so difficult. Is it so difficult to let go? We were just told, let go and let God. Just let go and let God. Some of us are too self-absorbed into our ego to be able to do that. And we've been choosing anxiety over serenity. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? This is a point to ponder, friends. It's a point to think about, to meditate upon, to try to understand why. How God has cared for us. If you just look back at it, and this is what I said to this doctor. I said, look back at your life, and you cannot ignore the miracle of your survival. You cannot attribute it to mere nature, because mere nature would have caused the Jewish people, like all other ancient nations, to disappear. You cannot attribute that to randomness, to happenstance, to nothing. And what you call my narcissism, by calling us the chosen people and the promised land, is, I think, the only argument that holds water as to why the Jewish people have survived against all odds, why you, sir, doctor, are still around, despite the insane amount of times that your personal family has been on the brink of extinction. It all depends on how we process it. So let's try to meditate this week on the portion of the manna, to think about the manna, to try to identify the manna in your life. God provided for every single Jewish person in the desert. God has provided for you every single day of your life. Think about that for a moment. It's a very, very courageous thought, that God has provided for you every single day of your life. And there's no reason why he shouldn't continue to do so for the rest of time. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a great day.
Well,
Rabbi, you get